Welcome to this session hosted by the EU Project EU Be Future on mobility and business events. We titled it On the Move, the importance of mobility in the business event sector. And we chose this topic because colleagues here that you will meet today told us, and we'll learn from them, that travel is around 30% of CO2 emissions, equivalent emissions in Europe. And actually, for those in the tourism sector, you may also be aware that tourism is 8% of the emissions. So first, I want to introduce the speakers today. Erin Vera from Travel and Events. Travel and, what was it?
Travel Smart, a Travel Smart campaign from TNE.
Yes, thank you so much. Elena Fortea, they will be introducing themselves later. Elena Fortea from EcoUnion and Marcos Raufast from Ecodes. If you want to tell us a little bit about you, and then we're going to go more into the matter.
Yeah, I'm happy to start. Thank you for inviting us and for introducing this topic that is super important. So I will introduce myself. I'm Erin Vera, so I'm working in TNE, Transport and Environment in Brussels, and we, like the organization, is a campaigns advocacy organization on transport, and we are leading this campaign specifically on business travel. Me personally, I have a journalistic background, so I used to be a EU correspondent a long time ago, but it's been a while already that I work in communications and campaigns in the EU environment, so the European environment and NGOs, so happy to be here.
Thank you. Elena, if you want to go ahead.
Yes, sure. So thank you as well for inviting me to speak today. My name is Elena Fortea. I work as a communications and project officer at EcoUnion, which is an environmental think tank based in Barcelona. And I'm responsible for the organization's communication, and I coordinate projects related to sustainable mobility at local, national, and European levels. So happy to be here today.
And last but not least, Marcos.
Thank you very much for the invitation. My name is Marcos Raufast. I'm project manager at Ecodes, Fundación Ecología y Desarrollo. It's an environmental NGO based in Zaragoza. We work on accelerating the green transition and we coordinate projects on transport decarbonization, among others. And we also count with the territorial perspective with a focus on local, regional, national, and European level.
Thank you. Now everyone has a little bit of an understanding of who you are and where you work. And I am aware that you are doing a lot of work with Travel Smart campaign, and in Spain in Viaje en Verde, which is the correspondent. So could you explain a little bit more? I know that, Erin, you have some slides because, I mean, this is supposed to be a conversation and we're going to be having a conversation, but to put everyone in context, if you can share us your screen and share us the slides to give everyone the context, that would be great.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So I'm gonna share my screen. Hopefully you're able to see it.
Perfect.
Yes. So, I'm going to explain why Travel Smart exists and why it's important. So, first of all, before going into the deep content, I'm going to explain what is Travel Smart. So, as I mentioned briefly before, Travel Smart is a campaign that is coordinated by TNE, which is Europe's leading advocate for clean transport and energy. And Travel Smart is a campaign that is a coalition of partners in Europe, but also in North America and in Asia. Specifically in Spain, so we have Ecodes and EcoUnion here that are part of this coalition and implement the campaign at national level. So what do we ask specifically in Travel Smart is we target companies and global companies and try to convince them on why it's important to reduce business air travel by 50% from 2019 levels, so just before the pandemic, between 2025 and 2030. So to put you all into context, I just to explain that aviation is one of the sectors, the transport sector that grow the most in terms of emissions, is the most climate intensive form of transport. And the predictions are, the forecast is that it will only continue to increase. However, there's a lot of talks and everyone is talking about how important it is to decarbonize the sector through different innovations in aviation. So they are talking about zero emission aircraft, they are talking about sustainable aviation fuels. But the forecast for this is that all these cleaner fuels and more efficient modes of aircraft are only expected to be ready at scale after 2030. So the problem is that the transport sector continues to grow in emissions, but we need to do something already right now, and we can't really wait until 2030. So what we realized at TNA is that business travelers are considered frequent flyers, and actually frequent flyers within the aviation sector is more or less are part of the 50% of aviation emissions. And because business flights account for 30% of European emissions, we thought, okay, actually, to reduce aviation emissions, one of the quickest way of doing it is to target business travelers and business flying specifically. And we thought maybe with the pandemic, when we actually learned to work without flying to have a meeting in Berlin the same day and coming back, actually we learned to do it, all these kind of things through online meetings like we are doing right now, having a webinar online. Actually, it could be kind of easy. It's a very quick and fast, an easy way to cut aviation emissions right now and not need to wait until 2030.
That's super. Yeah, cool. The ranking. I really like the ranking.
Yes. So basically, what do we do in the campaign? So to actually trigger the attention of these global companies that we are, like global companies from the US, from different countries, and in Spain we have also the biggest companies in the IBEX. They are part of this assessment. The ranking is an assessment of companies, and we assess them according to how ambitious they are in terms of reducing business travel and business flying specifically. We are assessing 325 companies from the different areas that I mentioned, so Europe, the US, and India. And in this year's ranking that was launched a few months ago, 21 companies out of the 325 have the A status, that is the highest one. There's A, B, C, and D categories. So 21 are the companies that are leading the way in terms of sustainable travel for businesses. From all those companies, only 57 companies have a specific target to reduce either business travel or air travel specifically, which is, and I will explain this later, is really the recipe to reduce business travel emissions and to reduce the footprint of the company is really to set a target. And from all those companies in the ranking, also only 49 report full climate impacts of air travel. We are always talking about CO2, but actually aviation emissions are more than CO2. There's also the non-CO2 effects of emissions that actually we consider that is more or less 2/3 of the emission of the aviation sector. And then an important thing that we also try to stress the importance of is that actually from the companies in the ranking, the top flyers, so the companies that fly the most, have a higher share of responsibility than the rest. So we say that from the top 25 flyers without targets to reduce business flying are responsible from 1/3 of all the business travel emissions of the ranking. The new thing from this year and from this edition is actually from all the companies in the ranking, 57% kept their emissions under 57 companies kept their emissions under 50% of 2019 levels, which is good. It shows that actually big companies have realized that this is possible. It's not super difficult to do it. And within this small group of companies that have a big share of emission, there are 57 that are already reducing, and are companies like IBM or Microsoft within those groups showing the way as leaders of huge company with a lot of emissions that actually this is possible. And then, as I was explaining before, only with clear targets, companies can ensure a sustained reduction in emissions that is needed right now before 2030. And this is a graph that shows that this is the case from all our companies in the ranking. Actually, if you see the ones that have air travel target and specific target to reduce business flyings are the ones that are reducing the most. So most companies are like closer to the 50% demand of reduction compared to the other targets that are less specific. And it's super important to include those targets in the travel policy that my colleagues will explain also later. I will not go into many details, but there's a specific ranking in Spain that is made up of 18 companies. And from all the Spanish companies, only 2 report non-CO2 emissions. And in all of them, only 3 of them include a way to reduce air flying through the modal shift, in this case, for example, shifting to rail. And then talking about the companies that have bigger share of responsibility, in the case of the Spanish context, the 3 companies that are the top flyers are actually Indra Sistemas, Banco Santander, and ACS Group. Then we also wanted to ask corporate travel specifically, because of course we can talk about these big entities that are, global companies, but what do business travelers, there are people that actually travel, think about this? And we did a specific poll in Spain as well, and it was super interesting because in general, people, the employees, want to reduce flying, but they say they talk about the importance of the companies to set a travel policy to be able to do that. So that's why they say that 75% believe that the companies have to do something about it so that they can reduce flying. And they believe that 77, they believe that setting target is something important to actually manage to reduce business flying emissions. So 71 of these employees think that they could fly less for internal meetings at least. And only 34% fly as often as they did before the pandemic. So basically the trend during the pandemic of flying less is here to stay. And then we can maybe discuss this about a bit later, but a good way for companies to reduce business flying emissions is actually to develop a travel policy. And there are 5 business basic steps to be able to reduce emissions. And first of all, setting a target is the most important one, reducing flying, and then make the modal shift whenever you can. But we can maybe have a closer look at that a bit later. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, super interesting. And yeah, we're gonna talk about all this specifically. I wanted to make the link now between Travel Smart and Viaja en Verde, because today we're talking about Travel Smart as the overall European campaign. But we, as people have already seen, we put some examples of Spain because we are recording this with the Spanish members as well. And I want to know the link, Elena, a little bit more on with Travel Smart and Viaja en Verde. If you can tell us a little bit more.
Sure. So yeah, Viaja en Verde is our focus is on Spain, as you already mentioned, but we also include tourism-related mobility, and here we mean travel for leisure, but also for professional purposes, right? So it would be both types of traveling, and we basically seek to raise awareness among policymakers as well, not only businesses. And also tourism managers about the need to promote the use of trains and also electric cars to travel to, from, and within Spain. So this would be a bit the difference between Travel Smart and Viaja en Verde. And as part of this initiative, well, I can mention that we have developed several key documents. For example, this is the 3rd year that we are working on this project, and the first year we developed a report on the climate impact of major tourist travel corridors in Spain. And then in the 2nd year, we developed a travel policy template for companies and organizations to use in order to reduce their emissions from business travel. Then we also developed last year, we published a guide on how companies and organizations can reduce their climate footprint. It's a really short guide, just with the basic steps that they can do to implement this travel policy, what like the basic things that travel policy should include. So it should be really really easy to implement, and then also some policy recommendations for policymakers, because we think it is also important that all these efforts from companies are also like supported from public policies. So that's basically it.
Are these in English as well, or?
I think the first report, yes, the travel policy yes as well, but the guide, no. We should translate it.
Okay. Yeah, because we could put it on when we upload the webinar, we can put them on the links there so people can access them.
Yeah, sure. We can translate them.
Thank you so much. And okay, now we'll go more into the conversation because we have seen how important transport is. And I would like to paint the picture, although you have already done that, but what's the context of travel in the business events sector? Because, like business events, I mean, of course, there's a lot of people traveling, but it's part of tourism. It's there, but it's also part of business. So here, how important, what's the narrative there?
Okay, so well, we all know that business events involve a lot of travel, and this contributes to emissions and environmental impact. So basically promoting sustainable mobility in this sector is essential. And we all aim to raise awareness and engage stakeholders on the importance of adopting sustainable transport practices, which would be, for example, like implementing a travel policy, for example, and for professional travel. And by doing so we would align the goals of the business event sector with broader climate and sustainability objectives, which would be the main thing.
Cool. Marcos, yes, we haven't heard you so much yet, I was going to say. And yeah, what's your point on this?
Yeah, indeed, business events are the perfect scenario to put in practice more sustainable practices by means of transportation on a rather small, but that can be a representative scale. We show new alternatives which can foster innovation and create new business opportunities by doing this. And at the same time, it may nudge governments and citizens to more sustainable means of transport by leading with the example of business.
Yeah, totally. I totally agree. I would like to continue with you with the answers. And what do you think are the main challenges? And is there hope for a low carbon mobility? What would then the roadmap be?
Well, I can answer this. It is true. There is hope on transport emission reduction, but the reality is that 30%, as Erin said, 30% of greenhouse emissions in Europe are transport with all the sectors, and because of the difficulties of electrification and because going slow in road transport and emissions in maritime and aviation are skyrocketing, there is little progress on transport emissions reduction. As we could see in one of the graphs, if you could go back to the presentation in context in the third slide.
Erin, could you share it?
So here, thank you. Here we can see that until 2020, due to the pandemic, as my colleague Erin said, there was a huge decrease, mainly due to tourism, industry, which stopped and decreased their emissions, basically. But after, the European Environmental Agency says that until 2032, we won't go back to the emissions of 1990. And this is the only sector that is fostering this, because in the others, as I said, there is this electrification that is going quickly, but not in the transport sector. So despite regulations and an increase on the efficiency of new vehicles, demand has widely increased. and it is not expected to slow down. Only by shifting to cleaner and more active transport modes, new and sustainable fuels, and reducing the need for mobility where possible, we will be able to achieve our climate goals and reduce our emissions. And this starts by a shift in business travel.
Yeah,
Totally.
and if I can add something else, it's also worth noting that currently there's a clear imbalance in funding, investment, and policy support between rail and other modes, such as aviation, because the aviation sector is heavily subsidized, which means that the prices that travelers pay do not reflect the actual environmental and social costs of flying. So this is one of the challenges as well. And then, so to reduce the transport-related emissions, it is essential to implement policies that support a shift toward low-carbon alternatives like rail or electric cars as well. And I think we all here believe that the model shift is possible and necessary, but it requires a strong political will.
Yeah, the shift is important. We need to, of course, reduce the amount of travel, which in the pandemic we thought we would shift completely and it would be possible. It seems like we are going back to numbers previous to the pandemic. One thing is to reduce, and the other to train, right? And could you tell us a little more about the importance of train travel to reduce the CO2 emissions? Maybe Erin.
Yeah, I'm happy to start. So it's true that the difference in emissions between train and plane is huge. So for example, I if you don't mind, I will share also again the screen of the TravelSmart website where we have a specific page dedicated to rail so that I can show you the huge difference in emissions. So do you see my screen right now?
Mm-hmm.
So we see here, we calculated what is the different emissions between in travel by air and by train when it comes to specific business routes. So a very common example would be 88% from Madrid to London with the stops in Paris and in Barcelona. But then also, for example, Madrid-Barcelona, it would be 75% of reduction. In this case, it's a bit lower just because of the difference like in emissions in the infrastructure, but still, it's still worth it to shift to rail to be able to reduce emissions from business flying. We also calculated in a campaign that we did on the Men Zero Cup from last year, how much the teams would reduce if they would have shifted from air to rail, and the numbers are impressive. For example, let me go back to my notes. So, for example, the Spanish team, if they would have traveled by train to Germany, they would have saved 98% of emissions. So it is not like reducing a bit, it's really reducing most of the footprint when you shift to rail for business travel.
Yeah,
Thank you, Elena. Yeah, your view. Yeah.
Yeah, so as Erin just mentioned, right, like train plays a key role in reducing CO2 emissions because it's one of the most environmentally friendly modes of transport. So we strongly support the development of night trains, but also the improvement of the entire rail network and services as a whole. If we want a significant reduction in emissions, and then I think it's always positive to mention all the beyond the environmental benefits. The train offer also some practical advantages in comparison to plane. For example, trains typically arrive in the city centers, which means saving time and transfers. Also, passengers can travel with pets and luggage more easily, and there's no need to arrive 2 hours in advance to the train station. So that's also, it's also important to mention that because it's not only more sustainable, but sometimes more convenient than flying.
Totally. And actually, it's hard, right? Because we think that when we take a plane, we feel like, oh, it's going to be 2 hours. But in reality, it's not 2 hours. It's like from my office to the place, it's like much more. And people don't think about these things. There's something that I learned listening to you last year when we attended a session that you made. Okay. And then something that we mentioned several times and I find super interesting and actually I think lots of organizations should have is a travel policy, right? So under the campaign you mentioned about travel policy for organization. So why is it important to have a travel policy, and what should it include?
Yeah, maybe I can start. I already started a bit before. So yeah, like travel policies we've known in these 3 years of campaign that is key to actually help businesses to reduce business travel emission, and it's also a way of providing the employees of best practices. So it's not like the fact that the company is committing to something, but also employees that might have a bit of let's say doubts about it. It also provides some kind of guidance on how to do it and what's the way to do it. In Travel Smart, we always talk about purposeful travel, because there's a it's not about stopping flying altogether, because we understand that sometimes for some specific objectives, it's important to be there physically. But what we say is that it's about making sense of the travel. It's about when it's really, really necessary that you can go. But when it's not, there are many, like we mentioned before, the internal meetings. Maybe for those you don't need to be physically there, you can do an online or use the online collaboration tools as a way of reducing. So what we say at Travel Smart, and then my colleagues will complement, there are like 5 things that they need to do. And the first one is, as I mentioned at the beginning, setting a specific target to reduce business flying emissions. And only by doing this, the company is held accountable to actually reduce it. Because if you don't set a target and you have a travel policy, but you don't have an objective to reduce it, then you can go over this 50%, and no one is gonna think, oh, you are actually not reducing. So it's actually setting a target and be transparent about it, like publicize your target, that the companies will be held accountable. The second thing, and is we've learned also this at Travel Smart by talking to companies, is to establish specific limits within the companies. Different companies, depending on their nature, develop different things. So you can develop a climate budget or carbon budget for the whole organization to say, okay, you can't go above this amount of emissions. Or some companies, like we do at TNE, for example, we develop a climate budget per team. So each team can't go above a specific amount of emissions. And then together it's a collective approach. It's like we are all in this boat, let's say, and we are all trying to reduce emissions, instead of having a big objective of reduction, and then maybe one person goes flies a lot and another person can't fly because we've already reached the target. You see what I mean? So it's a more solid approach to actually have each team and each person an amount of emissions that they can't go over. The third thing is, of course, establishing low carbon alternatives as a default option. So we always talk about virtual first, for example, avoid long haul flying. So to go to the US, for example, if you really have to go, then okay, but the default option should be meeting online. And then when it's about short haul flying, so regional, for example, within Europe, if there is an option of traveling by train, to do that as a first and by default option. There are different kind of policies within different organizations and companies, but a normal way of doing that is to establish a maximum amount of hours that if you can reach a destination, for example, I don't know, France, within 8 hours, which is like Barcelona, Paris, for example, is 8 hours by train, more or less. If you can reach it within 8 hours, you can't take a plane. This is something that we are also doing, for example, at TNE. And then the last but not less important thing is actually to report these emissions, because as I said, it's only by being transparent, reporting the emissions and how you are actually managing to achieve your target is that you are held accountable as a company or as an organization.
Yeah, so all in all, I would say from what Erin just said, that we are not saying like stop traveling, like at all. We just say like make smarter decisions, no, make smarter choices if you really need to travel, no. So that this would be, I think, the main goal. And I think we shouldn't forget that it's important to have a travel policy that it is tailored to the specific characteristics, needs, and the context of the company and the sector which it operates, because it's not the same a company that needs to travel for their own business, right? Like it needs to travel every week or every month, and then another one that just does it like once a year or twice a year for I don't know, for leisure or whatever. So this is important to take into account. And then, so this travel policy should serve as a starting point for internal reflection, conversation between employees and the whole company, in order to encourage greater responsibility and commitment to sustainability within the organization. So that's my point.
Yeah, I totally agree with what my colleague said. A good travel policy is key for any company because it can improve their employees' well-being, contributing to achieving environmental objectives, save money for the company, and improve their reputation. And also, I wanted to highlight that 2 years ago, we published our travel policy at the ECODES. And at the end of last year, we started to reviewing it and assessing it and how intensive are in terms of what means of transport we take at the company. And this year, we will publish. It's still an ongoing process, but we will publish the new update for this travel policy. And this is key to evaluate the impact of the travel policy, and so you can be able to adapt it to current context or challenges of your company.
Thank you. I actually looked at your travel policy, to be fair. And yeah, it looked really good. So we should be closing because we wanted to keep this short and we wanted the clear messages to be said. But is there anything else that you would like to say before we close? Like something that you think it's vital or highlights or something that you want people to, I don't know, to really have inside their heads? It sounds weird putting it like this, but what do you want people to really, really know?
I can go ahead. Maybe just to say that they can, if they want to start, just start with a travel policy, right? An easy and basic travel policy that they can achieve, and then analyze it after 1 year or two and see how it went and so on. So it's basically what Erin and Marcos just said, right? So this would be the easiest way to start reducing these emissions, and also to start this conversation internally and think like whether there can be some changes in the way we travel.
Yeah, just to add a bit on what I completely agree with Elena, after talking with companies, we know that they tend to be a bit cautious, let's say, about starting. They want to have everything very clear in their heads. But what we said, because the most important thing is to get started. So you have to start by something, and then it's a test error approach. So you are doing already something by starting, but without doing anything and not doing, because you don't have it clear. For example, how to account on CO2. This is something that they always ask us. It's only by getting started and start to calculate your emissions and to start reporting that you are actually going to improve year by year. So in Travel Smart, we always say that this is a journey. It doesn't need to be already reducing emissions by 50% next year, but starting already, it would be more than what you were doing before. So this is super important.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. The ambition doesn't have to be enormous because it's not achievable. And with this, you can also grow new business opportunities.
You're completely right. What I also think is that it doesn't matter who starts it, because sometimes is a director that really wants to do it and puts it, and sometimes it's an employee that is very motivated and can start suggesting it. And I mean, I don't know who's listening to us, but basically anyone can suggest the idea of a travel policy and make a change within the organization. So thank you so much for your time. Very inspirational. And yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.